I was stunned this weekend to see the laying on the trainer's table. What was your reaction from everything you've seen for it to get to that public of a point?
Honestly, we're so deep down the rabbit hole that doesn't really faze me, the fact that Micah is on the trainer's table, whatever. And I feel like, not to minimize what the final preseason game is, obviously there are a number of players fighting for roster spots. It's a very serious thing, but it is pretty normal for players to be chill, for lack of a better word, to be eating sunflower seeds, drinking Gatorade, wearing hats all sorts of different directions, towels and things like that. So this felt like a cousin of that to me. It just so happened to be the day after Jerry Jones went on Fox and Michael Irvin's show and sat down with Stephen A., which amplified the intensity around this whole situation.
I'm curious, just, your boots on the ground perspective of this situation. How do Cowboys fans feel? Do they feel like Jerry is the one that should be making concessions? Are they getting upset with Micah? What is the overall vibe in Dallas?
I think, Jason said that you guys have been talking a lot about the Cowboys. People feel like that's the goal. People feel like the fourth wall broke in that sense a very long time ago. And I think that there's a sense of, Micah's a bit at fault here, whether that's for the informal meeting or for the fact that he won't take whatever the Cowboys are reportedly offering him. But ultimately, I think the court of public opinion works against the Cowboys in this regard, given that, as you all have discussed, they do this all the time. This was a completely and totally avoidable situation. Micah first became eligible for an extension in March of last year. So the fact that the Cowboys are pushing this and pushing this and pushing this until the 11th hour, again, following doing it with Dak Prescott for a second time, a third time, a fourth time, you could argue with Dak individually, CeeDee Lamb. I mean, there's one common denominator here. And I think that the sense of the fan base is that it's the front office and that they do it for attention. There was a conspiracy theory that they were doing it to, in a weird way, promote their Netflix documentary. And people are just kind of tired of the non-football elements of this football team.
Even going back to Emmitt Smith, like watching the documentary and hearing Jerry Jones's first person perspective of talking about making this a 365-day-a-year kind of operation, of always wanting to be in the headlines, of, having the final word maybe in negotiations. It just feels like things haven't changed from 1989 to 2025. Is there any chance of Jerry Jones maybe stepping back from his position as general manager and just being an owner? Or maybe what's the feeling in the front office there and the kind of the powers that exist in the front office?
Yeah, I really doubt it. He did make mention of that as training camp began, that he's considered it before. And I think he was just kind of, talking and thinking out loud. But this is the way they've done things. And you can certainly argue that early in his career, relative to owning the Cowboys, that there was a lot of success behind it. But you could also point to the last 3 decades at this point as proof that this really isn't working. And I think that we overestimate Jerry's, hands-on involvement. There are obviously a lot of staffers and a lot of important people who make decisions, but at the end of the day, he is the person who publicly stirs the pot. He is the person who makes this more difficult. I mean, winning a Super Bowl, appearing in a Super Bowl, getting to the game before the Super Bowl, as the Cowboys are evidence of, is inordinately difficult. And Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones in the front office amplify the difficulty around that situation. And so it ultimately falls on the players and the coaches, and they haven't been good enough when they've gotten to important moments. I think everybody would be objective enough to admit that. But it also gets discussed in a way that is extremely volatile and extremely toxic. And nobody really enjoys that. You're already dealing with that if you're the Cowboys from the external standpoint of people and whatever haters and detractors of the team. But you divide it, because at this moment in time, to use Micah as an example, there are people, Cowboys fans, arguing for trading him, that he's being greedy, things like that, when, that doesn't seem like the MO you want to have relative to the best player on your team.
Let me be a contrarian for a second. Okay, just bear with me. Caroline mentioned Emmitt, right? We lived through Dak and Zeke. Like, this happens every couple of years. Everybody yells and screams. Free agency is where you spend A+ money on C- talent. It's not the way to build a team. Who cares? Like, at the end of the day, if Mike is going to get this deal done, and ultimately, like, it's just Jerry's money. I don't care about Jerry's money. So at the end of the day, why is this such a big deal? If he's going to end up a Cowboy anyway, and the season's going to go the way the season was going to go, like, why do we care so much?
I think that's a really good question, and one that not enough people ask, to be honest with you, because I think we all believe that Micah is ultimately going to get this deal. He's not going to be traded, and Dak and CD are really good examples of that. I think people care because this is a really broken way to do it. I think a lot of fans obviously want players to get as much money as possible. So in that respect, this is working out well for Micah, relative to as if they'd gotten it done at the beginning of the offseason or last year, as mentioned. But there's 100% evidence to prove that this is an irresponsible way to construct a football team. So I think to say who really cares, if you have to admit as a Cowboys fan you don't care, you have to acknowledge that this is an entertainment business. This is a media company, that as people like to say, that this isn't a team with winning football games as their top priority and their top objective. And maybe they'll stumble into that. Maybe fate will smile upon them. Maybe the oblong ball will break their way, and it will happen in spite of the way they went about this. But to your point about, spending A+ money on C- talent, I mean, they don't do that, right? Like, if you do these things, you can still go fill up with C- talent. And I don't know that you can argue that one player, two player, or three free agents would have made the difference over the last handful of years. But Bill Barnwell did an excellent assessment of how much money the Cowboys have costed themselves in the Dak, CD, and Micah negotiations specifically. And it's approximately $81 million. If you believe they would have taken market rate at the earliest possible time, you could have negotiated that. And so while you're right, that's $81 million of Jerry's money and not mine or yours, it is $81 million that could have been spent in the name of improving this team. And that's where the frustration lies for people.
I hear that. Let me just, for a little bit of clarity, say $81 million is a lot of money. I do believe, though, that the Cowboys have been fairly disciplined in their drafting approach. They've done a good job overall drafting and building their roster. And most of the time, like, we walked into this offseason saying the Patriots going to rebuild their entire team with $100 million of free cap space, which they spent on talent that we'll see. I just think, as much as we sit here and say they should have done all these deals to get ahead of it, and I do understand that, RJ, I guess my pushback is maybe not having the money for free agency isn't the worst thing, because free agency money more often than not turns out to suck. So I'm just looking at it from the Cowboys standpoint, saying not having the money to spend in free agency, okay, they overspent on these players, okay. Really, it just comes down to, can they draft well consistently? That's the way they're going to win football games.
I agree with that, to be clear. And I also agree that spending money in free agency, you can't just throw that at a team and expect it to improve. There's a lot of examples of that. You can certainly find outliers of where it was the difference maker in winning a championship, but in a philosophical sense, I completely agree with you. But I mean, to, I guess, push back on behalf of the fans and where people feel, frustrated, is the Cowboys get painted as this team that, will spend on every free agent. I think people look at Jerry Jones, the Maverick, or the gambler, as I suppose he would prefer to be referenced as, and feel like he'll spend on anybody, when that hasn't been the case. I mean, the last big time, kind of top level free agent they spent money on when it was time to do so was Brandon Carr back in 2012. So again, we could agree that maybe throwing money at free agency isn't the right way to go about it, but that was 13 years ago. And so why continue to try this path? Why continue to do things this way? And I think there's a different level of frustration that exists because the onus for all of this ultimately falls on the likes of Dak and CD and Micah. People get frustrated because you look at a team, and it's not hard to if you're a Cowboys fan, because the Eagles are within the division, like Philadelphia, and how they're willing to say this C- talent might not help us across the whole of the season, but they might help us in this random Week 9 game in Green Bay. They might help us in the wild card round. They might help us not have to be in the wild card round. So going at this in the same manner over and over is just counterproductive to a lot of people. And that's just from a roster building standpoint. If you talk about a chemistry or relationship standpoint, what does this accomplish? What does it accomplish to divide yourself from the top wide receiver on your team, from your franchise quarterback, from the best player on your team? There aren't a lot of examples in the 21st century of players publicly requesting a trade from the Cowboys. And it may not happen. It may just have been tactical. It may have been posturing for Micah. But at the end of the day, there's a rift here. There's a divide that is, even if they get this extension done, money fixes a lot of problems. Things will never, ever be the same. And so it's worth paying that money at the very beginning of the cycle to prove that you are an organization and a place where happiness and bliss is possible.
That's what I keep asking myself is, sure, yeah, Jerry and the Cowboys are in the headlines every single day, but at what cost? So I'll ask you, RJ, what do you think is the most likely resolution here between Micah and the Cowboys?
Yeah, I think that a deal gets done, and I think that it probably, I mean, the season begins, not even 14 days from now, 10 days from now at this point. I mean, it's absurd. I mean, you began with my tweet. They went all of training camp. They went the entire preseason without getting this done, knowing this was coming around the bend, having the experience. Even if, you don't believe that they had known how this idea works relative to Dak and CD last year, they obviously got a firsthand experience within it. I think this happens next Thursday morning. They smile, they laugh. Jerry sells a shirt with a catchphrase on it. The whole thing is sadly very predictable. And there will be a sense of peace. I think that people feel that it is over and that Mike is going to play. But I think that the whole phenomenon is just the latest example for people. This is Super Bowl 60 this year. And at the time of Super Bowl 30, as the documentary is proof positive of, the Cowboys had won 5 of them. They had appeared in 8 of the 30 Super Bowls at that moment in time. And we're about to double that entire time frame. So there's this weird symbolism in that sense of this year, and that it will begin with the same, antics, the same silliness, the same pot stirring, the same toxicity that has made them the most valuable professional sports franchise in the world. I think, we all like reality TV. I love The Challenge on MTV. I love Survivor. I love things like that. But you know what wins Emmys? Succession, Game of Thrones. Like, those are the types of shows that people are expecting the Cowboys to be. They're sick of just the Real Housewives Bravo level drama that is this franchise on a day-to-day basis.
To that point, though, because that would be a lovely, poetic cherry on the top of this organization that, 30 years later, here they are again, resetting the clock, and the Cowboys are back, baby. Like, that's a great, wonderful story that I think Cowboys fans are all hoping for. In your mind, though, what's more likely? That, or that the way that the Cowboys have been conducting business, over the last 10 to 15 years is maybe stale, and there needs to be kind of a refreshed perspective in the way that they do business?
Yeah, I think the most likely outcome is that, what works stays working. I mean, they have a formula that works for their bottom line, their end goal, which seems to be achieving net worth, making money, things like that. And so why rock the boat? I mean, this was one of the worst teams in the NFL last year, and yet they have been the most dominant, most talked about story every single day since the team in their division won their second Super Bowl in the last handful of years because of their forward-thinking roster construction processes. And so I think that they will continue to beat this drum and continue to feel like they're doing no wrong. And the next time there's someone to blame or a head to chop off for it, it'll be Brian Schottenheimer or Dak Prescott or CeeDee Lamb or Micah Parsons, because that's ultimately the price you pay for the check that they write you.
Are they a playoff team this year?
I think so. I think people forget that this is a team that won 12 games 3 years in a row before the front office, willfully sabotaged them. They have, I don't care where you rank Dak. I think we all agree he's a franchise quarterback. They have a top-level quarterback, one of the best receivers in the NFL, presumably the best pass rusher in the NFL. Their win total is 7.5, 8.5, wherever you look at it. I think that's really low. I think some people just look at the drama and the toxicity and the Bravo and whatnot. They'll win somewhere between 9 and 10 games, and maybe they draw the Daniel Jones Giants in the divisional round type of game. Maybe they get lucky and face no quarterback in the NFC Championship game. Maybe fate does reward them for crawling through this tunnel, and they're finally and ultimately Andy Dufresne on the other side.
Oh, that's amazing, by the way. Blog of the Boys, check it out on SB Nation. RJ, really appreciate your time. Thanks for hanging out with us.